Greetings all. Welcome back to the Coptimizer podcast. I've got another fantastic guest today. Super excited about this conversation. I have retired Chief of Police and CrossFit badass Diane Stuart on the show. And you heard me talk a little bit about her right before we went live. So I'm just going to jump right in. Welcome to the show, Diane.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Patrick. I appreciate it.
Well, it's always great to talk with fellow CrossFitters, and I think anyone that's listening right now is probably worried that all we're going to do for the next hour or two is talk about CrossFit, right?
That's what CrossFitters do. They talk about CrossFit a lot, an awful lot.
Yeah, well, there's always a lot of truth to some of those funny memes that float around. But I digress.
There is.
we're going to talk a little CrossFit, but we'll get to that later. I've got more important things to talk about, and I'm excited to have you because one of the things that we're really trying to emphasize on this show is the importance of wellness and overall comprehensive, holistic wellness. How do you take care of yourself? How do you manage your day? What do you do to optimize yourself so you can be the best police officer, the best mom, the best spouse, and keep everything in balance? And that's not an easy thing to do, particularly when you're a police chief. And a big part of our audience are police officers and those in leadership in policing. So how do you do it? Now you got an hour and a half to tell me how you do it.
It's funny. I was having a conversation with my daughter. She is an inspector for the district attorney's office out in California, and we were talking about. I was reminding her about balance. Balance isn't necessarily a day. I don't think it's a daily thing. I mean, there are balances like an overall. Sometimes it's on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. I think there's times when it might even be across a year. So, if you're fortunate and things are going pretty smooth in life, you might be able to do it on a daily basis. But overall, it's about not being, on your deathbed and thinking, man, I wish I had played more or taken care of myself better or spent more time with my family. It's about being in a place where at the end of life, you say, man, I lived life to its fullest and I got to do amazing things. It wasn't just about, being selfish as far as doing what I want to do, but about giving back and taking care of myself and taking care of other people and serving. Like, service is a big part of my heart. And I really, I think it starts at the most basic level, right? So in law enforcement in general, we have to be disciplined people to be successful. I mean, just starting out with the police academy, all the different things that you're balancing. It's a very new lifestyle. It's very balancing between book learning in the classroom, getting along with, the people that you're going through the academy with, doing physical fitness, shooting, scenario training, driving a car and looking at things. I mean, there's all that's all balance, right? And depending on where you came from, if you came from, college or the military, your background, it's so different, depending upon you're right, depending on your background, where you come from. I don't know if I really thought about balance a whole lot through my career, until, much later when I took my first exam to become a supervisor, because by then, I was a parent, I had children, and I really have always had an incredible passion for serving. I loved my job. I mean, I loved law enforcement. Obviously, I mean, I did it for over 3 decades. And
that's a good commitment right there. That's a long time.
It was a long time. And but what I realized is I needed to fit one more thing in there, right? I needed to fit time to study. In San Jose, I know in many agencies, they'll, tell you there's an upcoming exam and you might have a week or 2 or a month to study. In San Jose, the exams are announced more than a year in advance, because lists are good for 2 years, because you're talking about, 150 to 250 50 people testing, for example, for sergeant. And the stack of books that are required to be read and to be comprehended and to be able to put into action, they take hundreds of hours to get through, and then take notes and do flashcards. It's a big commitment process. And so I was like, okay, I've got kids, I've got horses, my kids have animals. How do I fit in one more thing? How do I
Yeah.
fit this in? And what would it look like to get through all of this? Well, I'm a good reader and I have a pretty good memory. So, okay, I'm going to commit to 4 to 6 hours a week of extra reading. And so unfortunately, when you have kids, as I'm sure many of your listeners can attest to, you're on their timeline, especially if they're really
Yeah.
young. And in between, if it depends if they're a baby and they're crying, or if they've got to be hauled to a soccer tournament, 2 states away. So I just wanted to take textbooks with me, and I had a really good friend who she would actually take my kids to like the park or to the zoo, but she gave me 4 hours a week every week for a series of months where I didn't like clean house or cook. I studied. And so that was the balance during, that period of time. And, it's funny
Yeah.
because one thing I know about you is, like me, you're really committed to health and wellness and fitness. And I would be not telling the truth if I told you that I was committed to a specific workout program during, those first 20 years of my career. I mean, I was fit. I was on a SWAT team. I was active outside. I always have lifted weights and done some running. I didn't have any idea what CrossFit was. I mean, I never heard of it. It wasn't even a thing. So I was pretty in shape just for the job, and I was very committed to never buying new uniforms. You know, my
Or having to put an extra notch in your gun belt. Yeah, like,
right.
man, what happened here?
That's the
Uh,
truth. My dad was teasing me the first time I got, when I got pregnant with my first daughter. He was like, "Oh, I hope you're not like the women I worked with, and then you never go back to the streets." I'm like, "What in the hell are you talking about? That's never going to happen." And back in the day, they didn't have FMLA. You went to work, you had your child, and if you were smart enough, you had insurance that allowed you to be off for 6 weeks of leave. And I went back at 6 weeks and one day with both of my children. I mean, there was not a lot of time you. There was no sense in getting overweight while you were pregnant. I mean, it was really motivating to not overeat, because I knew that after I had my baby, I was going to have 6 weeks to get acclimated and bond with my child, and then get back to working 4 10s. And so that's pretty motivating. And
yeah.
I would say that my uniforms were probably smaller by the time I retired than when I started, because I was a pretty big weightlifter when I started police work, and then I was a world-class CrossFitter by the time I retired. But I mean, just little motivating things. I mean, I wanted to go back in uniform. I saw lots of people at work that, did not seem like they'd be able to help me out on a car stop if it went south, and it wasn't just because women were having babies, it was men as well, not taking care of themselves, working long hours under high stress. And so I was always really internally motivated to at least maintain some level of fitness so that I looked professional in uniform and that I could go home at night to my family. And that's just, I don't know where that came from. It's not, I don't remember like my dad saying, "Oh, that's important." They taught us, they taught and talked about it in the police academy. And I was in a really, really big fight for my life about 2 weeks out of the field training program. And my partner got hurt. She got hurt really bad, and I was fine. And I was like, "Oh, I get paid to win." And then of course I went on to our merge team, which
Pays
is
to be
San
a winner,
Jose's.
right?
Yeah, San Jose's full-time SWAT team is called Merge, Mobile Emergency Response Group and Equipment. And I mean, there is zero tolerance for being unfit there. And it was just hammered into me. You always wore a long sleeve shirt and tie. right? It didn't matter if it was 100 degrees out. That's what you did. You always were fit. You took care of each other. You could do, right? You had to be Superman. You could jump off tall buildings and rappel down them, and you could run and you could shoot, and you could take care of each other.
Yeah.
And
What do
so
you?
I think that was important.
Yeah. Well, so what do you? Just brings up a great question. What is it about SWAT teams or people that are interested in SWAT street crimes that differentiates them from other police officers? Because of course, if you're a member of the general public and you're watching a show about SWAT on TV or whatever, everybody's fit and athletic, and you just assume that's the way it is across America, but it's not. And but generally speaking, inside of police departments, those people tend to gravitate towards higher levels of fitness and taking care of themselves. But it's an important trait for any police officer. Yeah, I mean, it used to kind of like, I used to scratch my head every once in a while, like, people, oh, you work out all the time, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, not really. But I build it into my schedule and my day. And my question is always internally, it's like, well, why don't you? What do you, there's a lot of
Yeah,
scientific explanations as to why,
there
but
are. Yeah, right. We could probably write a couple theses on that, but I think there is I think probably if you did a sampling of people that are on those high performing teams, and there's lots of books. I mean, I know you and I've read them, taught them, right? High performing teams. There is, and the key word there is team, right? So that's really hammered home into you the importance of being able to, in life or death, be able to rely on your teammate. And so there's an intrinsic responsibility to being ready to go at right, a call out, a moment's notice. You're at home asleep, and within 60 minutes you're out on a perimeter or getting ready to make an entry and setting up, life and death situations for success. And so I think that the priority in those teams is team building, and it's not just about shooting. Physical fitness is done as a team. It's why people, they eat together, they party together, they train together, they do fitness together. And that was my kind of the end of my point earlier. Was I went into the merch team 3 years after being with the police department. So really early on in my career, I was part of a very high performing team. Literally, I had like 3 years on when I went into merge.
well, I know the answer
And
to this, but how many other women were on that team?
oh, very funny. Oh, hundreds. That'd be zero.
So you were the
But
first. That's
well,
my point.
there I was the first woman to test for merge. There was a woman that had been appointed when he became the new chief. He put some women in some specialized units, and it hadn't worked out very well for the gal. She chose to leave. But yeah, I was the first woman to test and have a really, I would consider it a pretty successful career there. In San Jose, each unit has a cap, how long you can serve in the unit. And I served 3 years. That's what we were allowed to serve. And I don't think it was probably long enough professionally, but personally, it was probably long enough. Um, yeah, that was a whole different dynamic, right? Being a woman with 19 men on a high performing team. Um, that was something unto itself, to be frank. But I really loved my time with my team. In fact, oddly enough, we have a 50-year reunion coming up in 2 months.
Oh, nice.
I'm excited
Nice.
about that. Yeah, it'll be fun.
Well, yeah, I was telling you on our pre-call that we had a couple weeks ago that I've got a friend here locally, um, Mike. I won't say his last name because I didn't ask him, but he's retired San Jose PD. And just a shout out to you and San Jose PD. Mike used to remind me just about every time I saw him about how great San Jose PD was, and how it was the greatest police department on the planet. And we would never do that at San Jose PD.
Oh, San Jose's
uh,
had plenty of its own issues, but I would
uh,
say they are truly one of the most excellent professional well-rounded, well-educated police departments in the country. They really are
How old were
fantastic.
you? How old were you when you started there?
I gotta hang on. I gotta think about that.
So did you go?
22,
Did,
22,
did you
22.
go to college and then go to work there? Where'd you go to school?
I did. I did. I went to Cal State. Well, it was called Cal State Hayward, but it's called Cal State East Bay. Now I went to a state school, which is about 40 minutes north of San Jose. And I got the job offer. I tested for San Jose. It took me 4 years and one quarter. And so during that last quarter, I tested for San Jose, and it was really a blessing. I I got offered a job to start like January 5th, and I graduated December 12th. And so I had about 3 weeks to live my best life before I started police work.
Yeah, well, and
um,
clearly you didn't do anything that was going to get that offer revoked from you, so that's good.
yeah,
And
right.
the so are you from California originally? Is that where you grew up?
It's not where I grew up. I was born in Los Angeles. My dad was a Los Angeles policeman. For the really old listeners, and I don't know if there are any, there's a Joseph Wambaugh is a
Oh
pretty
yeah.
famous author of police work, and one of his first books was called the New Centurions, and it was
Yeah.
about the professionalization of the Los Angeles Police Department. And my dad was one of the New Centurions,
Oh, awesome.
and
That's a great book, by the way. If you've never read
it
it, go back and read it.
it is a great book. And he went through the police academy with arguably their greatest chief, Daryl Gates. And so I I grew up in a police family. So my dad was with Los Angeles PD, and when he retired, because back then it was 20 years in, and we were his second family. He had been married once before. And so I grew up in LA until I was 6. And he's like, I'm actually not going to raise my family in the concrete jungle. And so he moved us to Oregon, where he went into business for himself. And so I spent the majority, I mean, my best memories, my childhood from, 6 to 13. I grew up in Junction City, Oregon, and we had 20-acre ranch and cows and pigs and sheep and chickens and horses. And then we moved back to the Bay Area. He started um, a new business out there, an alarm company. And that's how I ended up at Hayward, going to university.
Hmm. Isn't that weird about how police officers, when they retire, they tend to wind up in very remote and rural places,
Right,
are
gee.
surrounded by animals and and far away from other people.
Yeah, funny enough, it's not that funny, right?
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I really, it's funny because people tease me. Aside from, I mean, obviously there's I don't, well, I don't, I'll speak about myself. There's an edge to me, right? And if you just met me and talked to me for 5 minutes and we were talking about, say, horses or CrossFit, you wouldn't guess what I did. But if there's a terse conversation or conflict, people are like, oh yeah, I don't know what you did, but you definitely were not like a chef in a restaurant.
You're definitely not one of those conflict avoiders.
No, no. And I really do not find conflict appealing. But I will not be bullied. I will not have my friends be bullied. I am exceptionally loyal, and and I will always take care of I will always take care of children and old people. I will be their greatest advocate. I have a very soft spot for those underserved.
Well, and that, in all seriousness, that's a great point because in a time right now where we're having this just a very difficult time recruiting and attracting young people into this profession, and even a lot of times the ones that we're getting in, despite your best efforts to try to screen and find the right traits, it's hard to do. There's no perfect science to it. But there is such a joy in being able to help other people. The rewards that you get in policing are generally not financial, and you're going to get smacked, 100 times for the every one, proverbial person that you get to help. But it's all worth it, right? I mean, those moments where you really get to help, that is, I think, amazing. So shout out to anybody that's thinking about the profession. Don't do it for the money. Don't do it for the excitement, although the excitement is, it's a fun part of the job and the money is getting a lot better. But, it really is about being able to serve and help others. And there's a lot of people out there that need it. And the reason why cops tend to want to go into, I used to tell people, I was like, when I retire, you're going to find me on the shady side of a mountain at the end of a long and windy dirt path, and in a little
But
log
has that
cabin.
happened? But it
Not
hasn't
yet.
happened. I
Not
mean,
yet.
you're living proof that we can, that we can survive, right?
Yeah, I think it's just those internal, the voice inside your head, when you're in conflict, and you're in conflict especially as a chief, right?
Yeah,
It's conflict all day long, every day. And it might
every
not be
day.
it's not the conflict that it's not like when you're working the street, right? Where what the outcomes for the most part are going to be. People either comply, they do what you tell them to do, or they're going to go to jail, or, it's very easy to navigate those kind of things. It's not at first, but when you get a little experience under your belt, you realize, okay. But yeah, once you start moving up the chain and you move into leadership positions, then yeah, it's the subtle conflict all day long, where trying to, whether it's implementing new ideas, new plans, getting people to hold themselves accountable, having to hold other people accountable, all the external stakeholders that have a say in what you're doing. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's politics. That's what you're talking about.
Well,
Because when we're on the street, we're problem solvers, and when you're in leadership, you are a politician. And how long you last in the job will probably determine the breadth of your political experience. I'm not a very political. I don't like political games. I think that your job is to serve to serve your community, and to take care of your men and women, your sworn and your professional staff, and it's pretty much that basic. And there's a lot of variables that come into play that should not.
yeah, I was lucky. I was lucky. My mayor was he was my former SWAT commander and shift commander. He was he retired as a captain on our police department. And so it was great. It was great. A lot of people always, they wondered whether that would be good or bad to have a boss that was a former police officer. And it's like, well, you're certainly not bullshitting them, right? You're
Yeah,
not
but you
going
know
in
what's
there. But I didn't have to explain things that he inherently understood, and that was just a blessing. And he was a great boss.
but he was a cop's cop. He wasn't an administrator that didn't have boots on the ground. You see, and I think that is key in leadership, whether you're in politics or you're in law enforcement. I don't think doing any one thing is to the community's benefit that you serve. Having well-rounded people, whether they were better at some things than other, is of truth, but to be well-rounded and to have dipped your toe in the water of all the different requirements. I mean, we were talking about it before we started, the show today was, look at what it requires to be in law enforcement. You have to be educated and grounded, and you have to be skilled and fit and smart. You have to be able to counsel a kid, and you have to be able to handle a murder scene. You have to have empathy and sympathy. And I think that's why we see such a breakdown in people's mental and physical well-being, is there just aren't the resources. I mean, look at what it's taken for our military veterans to be acknowledged and get the help that they need from the last wars that they've served
Oh, I
in. I
know.
mean,
It's
it's horrendous.
terrifying. Yeah.
It
I was
is.
at, I was so I've speaking of skydiving, right? We were talking about skydiving too before we
Yes.
went on there, but Andy Stump, he's got a great podcast. I love listening to him. But one of the things I'd never heard about, I knew he had been injured in line duty. He got shot um in but he told the story, and he's got a series coming out, and he told the story about the medical care that he was receiving, or I should say, not receiving, um, and I was just horrified by what I heard. And yeah, he was, I mean, he's had a long time, I think, probably to think back on this, but he was a lot more, I think, probably gracious than I might be, based on what he said. But again, everybody learns, and sometimes, sometimes it's trial by fire. But yeah, we were not
Yeah.
prepared as well as I thought we should have been.
No, but I mean, if you haven't gotten any medical care lately, look at what it is now. I mean, you go in to see a doctor, and if you don't tell them what's wrong, they're probably not going to find it. If you don't tell them what to look for, you go in and you've got a 15-minute appointment with an overworked doc
I
who's
know.
got 30 more people on his or her schedule for the day. I mean, just in general, people are living longer. There aren't enough resources to provide. I mean, we tangent off, but I mean, this podcast is all about wellness. And I mean,
Yeah.
if you don't advocate for yourself, if you don't lean in, and I'll just speak from experience, having had cancer and it not being, if had I not leaned in, I would never have gotten, I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you. And I mean, just a side view, lean in. If something's not right, keep leaning. And it's frustrating. They'll turn you away. They'll tell you there's nothing wrong. They won't order blood work. Um, and it's not because they're bad doctors. They're just terribly overworked. It's no different than the cop that had a fight with her husband or with his wife before they went to work, and they're just a little bit short and grumpy with the first person that they write a ticket to. I mean, same but different, right?
Yeah, and that's and because I do want to come back and I want to dive into that a little bit deeper. But on a surface level, I wrote an article that went on my LinkedIn profile the other day, and I'm not going to say the name of my team, but I live in West Lafayette, Indiana, home of just an amazing university. We were a number one seed going into March Madness, and only one other team has ever lost in a first round game in March Madness, and 16 seed took us out. I called them a 17 seed because they actually didn't even win their own conference. They backed in because the team that was supposed to be in March Madness was ineligible due to some NCAA violations. So I might say they were the first team to ever lose a set to a 17 seed. But it's funny. But our coach, he's very successful. He's had a great run. He's the winningest coach in university history. We just won Big Ten title. We won the Big Ten championship. But we go into this tournament game, we fall flat on our face. We can't hit a shot. There's a lot to dissect in that. I only bring this up because the the vitriol that you get from some of the fan base that just immediately just tears it, fire everybody,
Yeah.
they suck it all, and so part of my message in my article was like, none of those kids went out there, and they're all young men, right? I'm not going to call them kids, they're young men. None of them went out there to fail that night. They all wanted to win. Nobody wants to lose, but sometimes, shit doesn't go your way. And so you just gotta, reassess, figure out what happened and move on. But it was just crazy to me about how much people focused on the outcome and not necessarily the process. No consideration for the successes along the way. And it's just, and then you think about policing in that perspective. And that was kind of my message to cops out there is like, look, everybody's got an opinion, and I'm not saying it's okay. You want to jump on Twitter and say whatever you want to say, or Facebook. That's fine, but you should consider that there are other people, there are real humans at the other end of that, and cops of all people should recognize that better than anybody, because how many times have you heard that? Oh, well, why didn't you just shoot him in the leg? Our own president saying stuff like that. Why just shoot him in the leg? Take corn pop behind the shed and straighten him out. Or Why did you punch him 4 times? You should have only punched him once. You're always getting second guessed. You're always getting
Yeah.
in.
Well, and you know what? That was the beauty, I think, for a while, even though it was a small group, it was great to have citizens academies.
Oh yeah.
And I loved that, the leadership before me in San Jose used to, bring in some they'd bring in people that were really interested, but they would also bring in some of our greatest critics just to broaden their perspective. And I just thought that was really, really cool stuff, just to introduce people to it, if you will. And yeah,
Yeah,
and that's
everybody's
that's
battling something, right? And everybody wants to succeed. So from a healthcare perspective, nobody wants to be in poor health. And certainly nobody ever wants to get, cardiovascular disease or, God forbid, in your case, cancer. Like, I have a brother. I lost a brother to cancer. It's a horrible thing, and uh, the medical system, the docs, there's very few doctors that I think that are out there that are a lot like cops, right? You've got a few, and everybody knows who they are, right? The ones that are always stirring the shit, that are always causing problems. But very rarely does anybody say anything about it until it becomes a big problem. And it's the same thing, to your point, in every profession. Doctors are overworked. I've got several good friends that are doctors, and they're just amazing people. Dedicate their lives to helping others, and then, man, you make one bad call or and really what it boils down to is individuals that want to hold somebody else accountable, or hold anybody else accountable other than themselves. And it's not to say that there's not times that you need to be critical, and just like you're saying, it's very important to be your own advocate. But here, and then I'll shut up. My son, my middle son, is a wrestler. My youngest son is a wrestler, but he got injured, during a high school match, and I had to take him to urgent care. And we were sitting in this urgent care facility, and it was, and this is not a huge community, and it's a very affluent community, a university town. I mean, the room is just packed. It's filled, and I'm looking around the room. I'm like, the people here. I told my son, at the time, I think he was 15, maybe 16. I was just like, hey, look around this room. Tell me what you see. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, what do you see in here? People. Yeah. But what is it about the people? You know how it is with kids. You got to pry it out of them. But, in the end, my point to him was like, there's a lot of people like extremely obese, on walkers, just and a lot of people in bad shape. And I'm like, someday, I said, someday that's going to be me, someday that's going to be you. Your goal should always be to put that off as long as humanly possible, to not get to that point until something is gone incredibly bad. And a lot of that is within your control. And that's kind of the message I like to bring to police officers and police departments, is that you got to start early, right? It's never too early to invest in your own health, because there will become a point where it's too late to make the investment. It's kind of like trying to invest in a retirement fund.
it's yeah, without a doubt. And you better start early and start often.
So let's, after my little tirade there, you start on the police department, you're 3 years, and then what was it about Merge that that attracted you to want to go do that job?
Well, when I was in the police academy, of all things, our report writing instructor, Dave Newman, was on the Merge team. And he was the coolest human I had ever come into contact with. He was athletic, he rode motorcycles, he was on the SWAT team, and he taught report writing. I mean, you got to be kind of smart to do that, right? And he
Well,
had this
hopefully.
incredible yeah, he had this incredible connection, with everybody in the class. Everybody loved Dave, and he would tell stories about what he did at work. And my desk partner and I, and a couple of other people in the class. We had a pretty large academy class. I think there were close to 35 of us from San Jose, and then we had a couple of other outside agencies in our class. And we were like, that's what we want to do when we grow up. We want to be cool. Like Dave, we want to be on the merge team. So, I mean, we had him throughout the entire academy, right? So you're there for 6 months, and this guy came in, and he was always engaged and present and upbeat, even when we did, silly, stupid things. And he told us stories about merge. And I was like, yep, that's what I'm gonna do. And then you get through the academy and the field training program, and you're out on your own, and these merge cars would come by to these big events you were on, like some sort of perimeter, or we'd have to call the SWAT team in. We'd call merge, and here's the people that would show up, the unit of last resort, right? When the crap really hits the fan, that's who they would call out. And these men, because that's what they were, all men, would show up in these unmarked cars looking like they just stepped out of a dry cleaners, long sleeve shirt, ties, boots highly polished, completely squared away. They'd talk to the sergeant, they take over the scene, and they would just take care of business. And I was like, that is the coolest shit I have ever seen. That is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that, having no idea at the time that I wasn't supposed to do that. I was just like, I'm going to do that. That's what I'm going to do. Those are the cool people. They're the cool kids. They take care of business. And when everything goes south, they win. And so that was my introduction to merge, was from a report writing instructor in the police academy.
Well, that's cool. So what was the process to qualify for the merge team?
Well, in all specialized units in San Jose, you have to have a minimum of three years on to apply. And there was a little debacle where a bunch of people got asked to leave the unit. I think they had some inappropriate behavior. I think they went and did something on duty that wasn't within our city limits, and so there was a large amount of openings. I think there were. Let me just think about it. Usually if an opening came up in merge, it was once or twice a year. And in this particular case, they had 6 out of the 20 openings to fill. And so they announced a big test. And so all of my academy mates and I that had talked about being in merge back in the day, and of course everybody else in the PD, we applied. So you put in a letter of intent to test. And then you go through a shooting exam, and you go through a physical agility test, and you go through a oral interview with the lieutenant, the sergeant on each side of the week, because they covered both sides of the week, and then the team leaders. Well, at the time that I tested, they were rebuilding their physical agility test. It was under construction. They had gotten moved from one location, and they were building a new PT course over at the police stables. And so in my case, I only took the shooting test and the oral exam. And it was very stressful. I mean, I thought it was a hard exam. They ask you law enforcement questions and law questions and search and seizure. But mostly for the thing that I remember is, I think there was concern, and in reflecting back, even then, I recognized, that I was different than everybody else. One of the questions they asked me that I'm going to say with a high rate of confidence, they did not ask the other candidates. How are you going to feel getting dressed out in the field with your teammates? I mean, basically, you're getting naked, right? I mean, you're taking your uniform off, and you're putting your fatigues on, and your gear. And I remember laughing. It was asked, very professionally, and I can remember laughing. And I said, "Oh, you've never seen my bathing suit." I said, "My undergarments are way more G-rated than anything I wear at the pool. I'll be just fine." And I remember everybody, chuckling, and I mean, it was just a very easy, it was a very easy question to answer. It was very comfortable, and reflecting back, I'm sure that put people at ease, because it's just like there hasn't been a woman that has made it onto a SEAL team yet. And, with my husband being a retired SEAL, we have that conversation. He has it with people, he still teaches, over at Dev Group. So they talk about how they're going to feel about that. And, my concern, in going into Merge was not about getting along with the guys. It was really just about being able to have competency and fitness in the job, being able to do the job. I never really thought about fitting in. I mean, I was a team player, and if they were willing to work with me, I wasn't gonna have any problem with it. And yeah, I got selected. I was in the top 6 on the list, and so I went into Merge, and thus began a pretty difficult few years. You know, it was not a very seamless transition, as much as I wanted it to be.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's when it's like that for all pioneers. I think when you're the first that's going to do everything, I mean, you really you're paving the way for everybody else, and yeah, that cannot have been an easy thing to do, but a hell of an accomplishment.
It was great. And I had some key support in the right, in the right places. And that made it possible.
Well, we'll talk about fitness in a little bit. And you clearly have demonstrated adequate levels of physical fitness and an adequate capacity. So I don't know that was going to be the thing that held you back, but I do remember you were telling me when you went to a sniper school. Maybe tell that story real quick, because I think that's funny.
God. Yeah, I'll
you don't have to say any names, but
okay. Yeah, especially since I'm going to see the guys when they celebrate Merge's 50-year birthday. Okay, so traditionally in a municipal police department, which is kind of funny if you talk to a military guy, the job that nobody wants to do is to be the sniper, which is kind of funny because I think particularly nowadays where things are very hands off, I really believe that a sniper, and if you talk to any military person, they'll tell you they're the most highly trained person in the team. But the mentality when I went into Merge was the cool people were the entry team. So of course I wasn't one of the cool people. I was new and I was a woman. And so they said, okay, you're not cool. You're going to be a sniper. And so I went off with the other newbies, and we learned how to shoot long guns. I had no experience shooting long guns, and our rifles consisted of old evidence guns, guns that had been turned in and never picked up. And we didn't even have at that time we didn't have professional sniper rifles, which quickly changed. But they said I think I've been in the unit about maybe 3-4 months, and they said, okay, there's a sniper school coming up down at Fort Ord. There used to be Fort Ord used to be in Monterey, California. It's now a university, Cal State Monterey. But at the time, it was it was an Army base, and so myself and 3 other guys got sent to sniper school, and we didn't have a lot of money for training, and so one of the guys had a really, really nice RV, and the back had its own like private bedroom, and then the front had sleeping quarters. And so we took this guy's RV down, and as the lone married single female gal, I was allowed to have the back of the RV. I got the queen size bed, I got the posh area. So we pull this RV in and we go grocery shopping. We come back and we take a little run. We're getting ready for class, for school to start the next day, and we had been warned. Hey, you're going to take a PT test, an FBI physical agility test, and it's got pull-ups and sit-ups and push-ups and a 2-mile run, and don't sweat it, you'll be fine. And if you for some reason you don't pass something, don't worry, you'll be able to make it up on at the end of the class on Friday. Wink, wink. It's actually a barbecue, but they tell you you're going to make up the PT test. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, the only thing I had concern about is I'm a big, stocky weightlifter girl, and I'm not a big runner, but I thought, I can run the 2 8-minute miles. I'll be okay, because it had to be 7. I lost it here, but it has to be sub 16 minutes. And so we we get to this class. The four of us drive over in the morning out to Monterey, and we get out of the car, and there are people everywhere. I mean, there are students everywhere. I mean, there was a lot of people. And we all pack into this classroom, and the hostage rescue team, that's who hosts the class, the FBI hostage rescue team, they walk in and they're like, okay, we're going to get this party started. First of all, we have 10 shooting lanes. So there's room for 10 snipers and 10 observers, which you guys will trade off on. So we have room for 20 of you. And there are like 63 of you in this classroom. So we're going to do a PT test. And you may have heard in the past that if you didn't pass the exam, you could make it up on Friday. Well, we're going to tell you right now, if you don't pass, you're going home. We do not have room for all these students. How they got so overbooked, I don't know. I'm sure it wasn't them. It was probably somebody like an admin part of the FBI. So we go out to this PT course, and one of the guys I'm with, he was a really good friend. We went through the academy together. He's like, man, I'm sweating this whole pull-up thing. He's like, as long as I can do chin-ups, I'm good, but if they make us do pull-ups, I'm out. So we go up there, and I can't remember how many you had to do. I think you had to do like 6 or 7 strict pull-ups. And I was like, oh, I'm going to do lots. I'm going to do extra because I'm the only woman there, obviously, as you can imagine.
What year was this?
19, hang on, let me think. Like went on in 1986. This is beginning of 89 or 90.
Okay.
Let me think. I was on 3 years. Yeah. So I'm going to say the end of 1989. I remember it was in October because I had a birthday that week. So we go out, we do the pull-ups, and my partner can't do the pull-ups. He can do chin-ups. And the Navy SEAL, they had 2 guest instructors. They had a Navy SEAL and they had a captain from the Marine Corps. And they made those 2 poor guys run the pull-ups. And later the SEAL told me, yeah, it's because they didn't want to be the bad guys. The FBI didn't want to be the bad guys, so they made the 2 guest instructors. They knew they'd have the biggest washout at the pull-up bar, and so they were running the pull-up bar. And so my partner was freaking out because he didn't do it. And I'm like, well, when we get done with the run, just go back and you'll be able to get them. And so we finished all the testing. The other 2 guys were in a different group than my partner and I. And so we went through, the sit-ups, the pull-ups, and then for the run, I was a little bit worried about it, but the head guy from the FBI just says, hey, I'm going to keep you on pace. I'm going to run every lap just slightly under 2 minutes. You'll make it if you follow me. And so did the run, and we went back into the classroom, and none of my team is there. They've all been asked to leave. I'm the only one left on the San Jose team. That was awkward. And so, basically at the end of the day, I got a ride out to the RV park, and they handed me my bag of groceries from what we had shopped the day before. And they said, yeah, we're trying to figure out what we're going to tell the commander when we get back to work. Have a good class, Diane. And so I had a long commute home. I commuted home, and my phone rings, and my commander calls me, and he's like, what is actually happening out there? And I'm like, well, I'm commuting an hour and a half each way because, none of the guys are there still. They took the RV home. And he's like, I'll get you a hotel. And he goes, so what did you do different in your test? Like, which test did you take? And I go, I don't understand your question. He's like, well, I talked to one of the guys, and he said that you took the women's PT test. There's no women's PT test. What are you talking about? It's just a basic physical fitness test. And I just took the FBI's test, and he laughed. I thought he was going to cry. And my poor teammate, to the date that we retired, 20 years later, they would still ask him, how's those pull-ups coming along, buddy?
Oh, man.
And the other 2 guys, they didn't pass other parts of it. one guy didn't pass the run, another guy didn't pass something else. I don't know, but nobody ever talked about that. They just gave that poor friend of mine the hardest time about the pull-ups. And I guess the story lives on because my daughter is in law enforcement out in the Bay Area, and every time she trains with San Jose, she looks a lot like me. And they're like, "Oh my God, we heard the story about your mom and pull-ups, and so couldn't do them." And she'd call me up and she'd go, "God, Mom, can you believe it's 2020 or 21 or 22 and they're still telling that story?"
Hmm.
Yeah, it's terrible for
there's
him, but it's funny.
and there's still a lot of male cops out there that can't do a single pull-up. So
Well, shame on them. I hope they don't. Hope they weren't going to help me in a fight.
yeah. Yeah, and that's what it boils down to, right? I mean, it's really about, do you have the capacity to get the job done? And that's the one thing. It's just people. I just it's confusing to me, but I don't care if you're a man, a woman, what color you are, if you're gay or straight, whatever. I mean, can you do the job? That's really that's what you're here for, and that's what we need you to do. And you know,
Yeah, nothing else makes a difference. You should be able to do the job. But you also, and that that talks, we talk about that responsibility and where does that come from? At the beginning of this, when we were talking about where does that come from, and all the books that are written about that mentality, and how do you prioritize it? How do you make time for it? Patrick, I do believe that for you and I, for example, we're incredibly driven people, right? Internally we're driven. DNA, the way we were raised, competitiveness, desire to serve and be good at what we do. I mean, it's probably a combination of all those things. And because we're so driven, um, the paradox is being able to carve time out for ourselves to take the time to be fit, to be mentally and physically fit, and if you're not mentally fit, to be able to admit, I'm not mentally fit, I need help.
yep.
Being strong enough to admit you're weak, being strong enough to say, I feel guilty carving time out to go do an hour of fitness because I have work is calling and the baby's crying and I have to take my kids to a soccer game. I mean, I will tell you that sometimes my workout consisted of running laps while my kids were playing a game of soccer. I mean, that was the only time I could get any fitness in. And um, it is not easy, I think, and you can speak to that as well. It is not easy to find balance, and it is not easy to carve time out for yourself. But one of my favorite sayings is, you always make time for what's important.
Yeah. Yeah. The one that the other saying is right. It's your priorities are set by not what you say you're going to do, but how you spend your time. What do you actually
Yes.
do? Because that's what tells you what your real priorities are. In your head, you may have different priorities, but your actions really, they pretty much dictate what they are. And yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I loved working the night shift. I started on our agency in '95, and I went right to night shift. And I got promoted to sergeant. I think I was like 6 or 7 years on the department, and they made me go to afternoons, which is kind of like nights. But and at that point, I'd had two boys, and we eventually had a third boy. But it's that when you're working nights, my wife was working day shift, you've got kids. I was on the SWAT team. I was a photographer. I had a lot of things outside of just my regular duty that I was responsible for. But that was to me, the fitness time was, I've said this multiple times. I think I was just really lucky early in my career to stumble upon some. I mean, I was in shape and I was working out, and that was always a priority for me. But I found data that was just telling me, like it was screaming at me, like, hey, this profession is very hard on health. Um,
Yeah.
there are not a lot of good outcomes, and I had very good experiences with some fitness and nutrition plans and stuff, and that's eventually how I kind of stumbled on the CrossFit too. But um, the yeah, I just when when I had a baby, one of the first things I did was, and at the time they weren't easy to find back then, but I got a baby runner. I got a baby.
Yeah. Well,
I
you're
got
a,
one of those strollers that I could run with. And then when I had two, I was like, well, can I fit them both in there? Do I got to get a double wide? It's like,
yeah.
do I get a bike trailer where I ride my bike? But yeah.
But you were ahead of your time. I mean, you recognize that you wanted to stay fit. And I think for me, they talk about that 5 pound creep, every year. And I think by the time I was, a lieutenant, I had a ton of personal stress in my life, a ton of home stress with my ex-husband. I lived with somebody who was very mentally unwell, very, very unfit. The typical, if you've ever read the book Emotional Survival
Oh
by
yeah.
Kevin Gilmartin, I'm sure you're very familiar with it. I mean, he was the police officer that sat in a chair and watched Maury Povich and Jerry Springer all day, every day on his days off. He was such an unwell human, but they didn't talk about emotional survival. They didn't talk about that symptoms. I just knew that he was really impossible to live with. And that stress transfers over to the children and to myself. And I really wasn't carving time aside for myself, whereas I had always been fit and been on the SWAT team and been active, and my kids were in sports, so I would do some activity, but the stress became overwhelming, between studying for promotion exams and living with such an unhappy human being. um, I really think that CrossFit saved my life at some point, because it got introduced into law enforcement, and San Jose was sort of cutting edge as far as they were having classes at work. I was working too much to go, but I knew it was there, and finally a friend talked me into dabbling in it, and I just I got a taste of fitness again. But it really wasn't until I left San Jose and went and became a chief up in the East Bay that I really got into it competitively. And I just realized that over the years, those 5 pounds of creep, I still looked just fine in uniform, but I didn't like the way I felt, and I felt tired, and I felt unfit, and I definitely wasn't giving my best performance at work, working the long hours. When I left San Jose as the assistant chief, the chief of police is not just a figurehead, but they do a lot of traveling. They're gone a lot. And so the assistant chief is responsible for the day-to-day operations. And I was just being sucked into a vortex of work. And it was like, nope, I'm going to start setting time for myself. So I would go into work early, and I started doing CrossFit with my homies, as I call it, because by then, when you're the assistant chief, your friends leave, right? Only your really good friends stay by your side, right? Nobody wants to talk to the chief. I mean, she does all the discipline. She's, telling us what to do. And so I started dabbling, in fitness, and I started to have more energy and feel better, and that, that was very life changing for me. And I think when you have a very obsessive compulsive personality, you like to do things well, and you don't do things half-assed, that's a really good fit for CrossFit. I think that's why people who get out of prison, or people who are alcoholics or have drug addiction, they thrive in the CrossFit community, because it brings people together. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, or if you were an addict or a cop. I mean, everybody comes together and supports and cheers each other. And it's all about, being physically and mentally fit and learning how to eat well. And, that's what I love. So guess what we go back to, Patrick? We go back to the team, right? The
Yep.
whole attraction to team, right? And team and community. And, even though I don't train at a affiliate anymore, I have a group of partners that come in. to my home gym. I had a huge home gym. It's like 1,800 square feet, and my favorite days are the days I don't train by myself. That I have community and I have friends watching over me. I train with a games athlete. He's the top adaptive athlete in seated without hip function, and we train together a couple of times a week together. And um, I provide coaching advice to him, and he to me. And it's generally the highlight of my week. We have really robust, controversial, political life conversations, and it's just like a super safe environment. And so not only does it bring the physical fitness, it brings the mental fitness for adult conversation, mental stimulation, discussing controversy, disagreeing, and we're still friends, which seems to be a lost art in today's world. I don't know why. I mean, Jedediah Snelson is the guy I train with, and he and I mean, sometimes my husband comes and he's like, "Oh my God, you guys are like going at it," but not in like an attacking way, but we're like, we both have a strong opinion on things and we don't agree on everything, but he's my friend and my training partner, and it's absolutely fine to disagree on things.
Yeah, it's great when you have something that can keep the glue together and unite people around something that's positive and that's good. So before we get too far down this road, for people that are listening and for police officers themselves, you were mentioning kind of some of most police officers I think are familiar with Dr. Gilmartin's work now. If they're not, if you've never read it, it really, we give that book to our new officers and their families. And on day one, we literally we teach a class to them about why this is so important. But the physiological stressors, and I'll go back to the late 90s, when I'd read a book from Barry Sears, The Zone Diet, which I'm sure you're familiar about in CrossFit. That's ultimately what when I heard that CrossFit used the Zone Diet, that was the hook for me. The performance that I saw one of my partners had in our fitness test, and then knowing that they were using the Zone Diet, I was like, I don't know how I've never heard of these people before, but I'm all in. But I also read a book called In Fitness and Health written by Phil Maffetone, and I've mentioned it a few times. And it's another book. It's been revised a few times. Phil Maffetone, he trained Mark Allen, like 6-time Ironman champ. In the 90s, he was kind of way, way ahead of his time in training endurance athletes. And I'd had a bad experience with the nutrition program that I tried. And then that's why I started the Zone Diet. And I had a really good experience. So I was lucky to find out that the right diet can crush you and the right diet can save you. And it's going to be different for everybody. So I'm not here to say go do the Zone Diet. I do think that most people would probably benefit from it, but you got to find what works well for you. But the Maffetone book, when I was reading it, he has a specific part in there where he talks about the 3 stressors on the body: chemical, emotional, and physical. And I'd never really heard it explained that way. But when he was talking about these types of stressors, he went into a whole segment on adrenal stress. And
Yeah.
I was like, huh, and if you're a cop, trust me, you have adrenal stress, because that the adrenaline dump that you get when you're, on your way to a hot call, or, you're in a fight or a foot chase or whatever, those things, the average person doesn't experience anything like that. Like maybe, and the way I try to explain it to people is like, if the average person, like you're getting ready to drive through an intersection and a car runs a red light and almost hits you, you slam on the brakes and, your heart rate jacks up and you feel shaky and nervous. I'm like, that's an adrenaline dump. That's your body, doing what it's supposed to do. Police officers, depending on where you work and what you're doing, right? I mean, you could experience that multiple times a night, like every single night you go to work. So there is a recovery period that has to happen on the backside of that. And in policing, typically, especially back in the 80s and 90s, and sadly, even to this day, there are still police departments that don't put people on straight shifts. They rotate them. They make them go from days to afternoons to nights. thinking that they're doing them a favor by giving them a weekend off once a month or whatever. And, in the end, they're just, they're just really crushing, just really crushing your health and your adrenals and high levels of cortisol. But it's a long way of saying,
They've got court in there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just so many things that are disrupting what a normal day should look like. So
agreed.
These things, they are unavoidable. We know that they're going to be there. We know they're part of the job. So it's knowledge is power, right? Once you begin to understand this, and so I taught my first wellness class in 1999, and I literally laid this stuff out. And he's got a great section in there about donuts too. But if you want me to ruin donuts for everybody, I think I've mentioned it before.
I don't think you have. I want to hear it.
All right. Well, remind me before we finish. I'll come back to donuts. Make a note. It's like, come back to donuts. I don't want people turning this off in the middle of the podcast.
I'm writing it down.
So knowing that these things are there, how do you mitigate it, right? What are the things that you can do? And nutrition, exercise, and so when I opened up a CrossFit gym, ultimately, and then when my wife and we sold that and eventually converted, I kept my affiliate and then eventually just transferred it over to a nonprofit and opened up a CrossFit gym in our training center, our police department. And everybody was freaking out, like, oh my gosh, Chief is going to expect us to be CrossFitters. And it's like, no, I don't want you to be CrossFitters. Yeah. What I'm wanting for you is to have a facility and have access to a place where, you don't have to worry about who's in here. It's a safe environment. And we have people that are trained that can watch your mechanics, that can make sure you're not going to do anything that's going to get you hurt. It doesn't have to be CrossFit, but we just started wanting to remove these barriers and to educate people on this is how you live a long and healthy life. Right. Nutrition, exercise, and, good emotional well-being. And well, how do you get the emotional well-being? It's all connected. It is all connected. And you can't make people do it, right? Like my dad used to say, right? And you're the horse person. You can lead the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But, we can do things like this. And so it's a long way of saying there are ways for us to mitigate these stressors, but before you can mitigate them, you have to understand what it is, what the impact that the profession can have on your health. Because for you were working 7 days a week, you're in the grind, you've got a difficult home life, which you can't separate home and work. Just like they're always going to be interconnected. It's difficult to have a good night at work when you're having a hard time at home, and it's hard to have a good time at home when you're having a hard time at work. They are interconnected, and sometimes it's unavoidable. But I digress. So you wound up getting cancer. Do you mind telling us a little bit about that and what that experience was like?
It was just really a normal, OBGYN appointment, and that I had every year. And I I got a call from the doctor herself, which I thought was, when she called me, and she said, hey, you had a bad pap smear. That's really out of the blue. I just saw you last year. So I'd like to do another one, just because, I don't know, just maybe there's bad sample or something. So I went back in, and I had another pap smear. And I can remember, I was in an appointment, I was getting some body work done. And I was we were just getting started on the appointment. I usually turn my phone off, but my phone was on and it rang, and I saw that it was the doctor's office. And I told the massage therapist, I need to take this call. And it was the doctor again. And she said, hey, I would like to see you and your husband this afternoon. I would like for you to come in this afternoon. And I was like, is everything okay? And she goes, oh, you know what? We'll talk about it when you come this afternoon.
Yeah. I was like, I'm a cop. I
It,
know what that means.
I
Yeah.
was like, so it was not a very relaxing session for body work. And so, I got home and picked up the hubby and we went to the doctor's and she's like, this is not a huge deal. We're going to do a procedure to take out the cancer in your cervix, and it'll just be a small little procedure, and it'll be fine. But it is concerning because we've never had any indications before. And so, would you believe, on top of all of this, so the surgery gets scheduled like for the week after, and I'm on my way to work the morning of the surgery. Uh, I'm a captain at this point. I drive an unmarked car in uniform, to and from home. I have a full-time car, and I'm on my way to work, and I'm at the intersection next to the police department at a red light, and I get struck from behind, a guy, a crankster, a meth head, late to court. He hits me at about 40 miles an hour. I'm at a dead stop. Um, I don't really remember too much. I know for a second I was definitely blacked out, totaled my car. And yeah, I had surgery that afternoon to a little bit of my cervix removed too. It was not a great week. And when I woke up from the little quick procedure, she's like, it's kind of concerning. It wasn't like a little spot. I took out 90% of your cervix. We need to keep an eye on this. I was like, okay. So, you know, fast forward to all of this happened, and I had changed medical. I had a new doctor, and the doctor that had done the surgery was like, hey, you need to get this taken care of. I went to the new doctor, and he was like, oh, you don't need to worry about it. Everything's fine. And you don't need to have a check every 6 months, like she said. You're just fine. And it didn't sound right to me. Um, my daughter ended up being hospitalized with a really severe bacterial infection. And while I was in the hospital, I was in the hospital with her for 3 days straight, 24 hours a day, um, running my police division from a hospital room with my daughter. And the nurse was so fantastic. Her son was a canine officer with the local agency. And we got to talk, and then I told her about what I was going through. And she's like, you need to see a different doctor here, because it was Kaiser in California. So she hooked me up with a different doctor, and that doctor ended up doing another pap smear. And she's like, your cervical cancer is back. I mean, it had only been a year. And she said, this is really unusual. Um, it's slow moving. It's not like any rush. I was just getting ready to be transferred to special operations. Excuse me, I keep losing these earbuds. They just kept popping out. I was just getting ready for a transfer. So I went in, I met with my chief, and I said, I know we're getting ready to do this transfer to this really great job, this big job. And I need to have a hysterectomy. And I go, there's no rush. I mean, I have cervical cancer, but there's no rush. And he looks at me. I mean, he is this older, gentle, kind soul. And he looks at me and he goes, so what are you suggesting? You think you're going to put off the surgery because you're getting transferred to this dream job? And I said, yeah, she said it's no rush. And he goes, absolutely not happening. You're going to go have surgery, and then we're going to do the transfer. I'm not going to give anybody else your job, but you're going to go get this taken care of. And I did. I went in and I got it taken care of, and the cancer had spread. And so I was lucky, I didn't have to go through chemotherapy or anything. But had he not provided, sage advice, I would have waited, because I always prioritized my job over my own health up until that point. And the parts I leave out is it was a big deal to change doctors. It was a big deal to get into this gal who, kind of dug in and found out that it was still there. And, I don't know where things would be at if I hadn't leaned in and changed doctors. If my daughter hadn't been hospitalized, I hadn't met this nurse who said, no, that doesn't sound right. I mean, everything happens for a reason. And yeah, it was a really, really tough time, in my life. And just, I mean, I'd been married for a long time. I hadn't had, there was no reason for me to be sick, but I, along with my doctor, truly believe that most of us carry bad cells and good cells. And depending upon your lifestyle, they're activated. And one of the first questions she asked me when I had had that bad pap smear, before is, do you have more stress in your life? What's your stress level like? And I'm like, oh yeah, I got promoted to captain. I'm pretty much working. I'm in charge of a division. So it's about 250,000 community members and 350 cops 24/7. And she's like, yeah, I really believe that your cancer was activated by your stress level, by you being constantly under rested, overworked, and chronically stressed. And that for me was the, you know, tipping point, if you will. I was never fortunate enough to I didn't know anything about nutrition, Patrick, like you. You really were a pioneer in that, because I went to my first CrossFit games really not knowing how to fuel myself. And I said, that will never happen again. I will never, ever not know how to fuel myself. I will never not know how to have proper nutrition. But I mean, I made it to the games in 15 and didn't know how to eat. I mean, it was after that, and I didn't get to
So you're
finish
clearly
competing.
working harder than me in the gym. So
Oh, in all the stupid ways. I mean, things I could have known about and read about. I mean, I just wasn't fueling myself well at all. And yeah, so between, being sick and that, is a really kind of I think I've blotted it out. A lot of it is just, a very dark time. And in my personal relationship things were very, very bad at home. My light and joy was my daughters and my work. Those were the two, and my animals. I always had horses. Those were what made me happy. Everything else was kind of a show, to be honest. And um, yeah.
well,
So learning how to take care of myself after that surgery, that was like, holy shit. I mean, that can kill you. You need to get it together. And, making life changes, I was slow to make them, but I did it.
well, and the good news is, right, is that you did trust your instincts. You followed up on what was suggested to do, and what probably what your own intuition is telling you to do. And in the end, that saves your life, right? And I try to tell people that all the time, right? It's like, the reason you need to focus on this stuff is because the life you save may be your own. And that it's you don't have to stress about it, you don't have to fret about it, but if you build in a good plan for how you're going to manage your day, how you're going to manage your nutrition, how you're going to manage, when am I going to exercise, when am I going to take a little time for myself, when am I going to do things that I enjoy. You have to, nobody's going to do it for you. And
Yeah.
that's, you have to do it for yourself. So that it's really inspiring to hear your story, because, not only did were you a pioneer in many different ways, right? You're a first female member for your merge team. You ultimately become a police chief, and then you survive cancer, and now you're competing in CrossFit, and not just competing in CrossFit, right? I compete in CrossFit. You compete at a very high level of CrossFit. So, uh, you know, and I don't, if you don't do CrossFit, you probably don't, a lot of times people don't recognize the dedication and the level of uh, just the level of suck that you got to endure to
Yeah.
be, to be at a high level.
Yes.
Most people aren't willing to go there, and that's why there's only a few people standing on the podium every year. But
Yeah.
you made it all the way to the podium as a CrossFit athlete. So
Yes. Yeah.
it,
I mean, I I don't have a lot of sayings, I always, like I told you, the most important thing to me is when people say, I forgot you or I forgot to do this. And I always, I have lost friends over this because I think we could agree like anything in life is, making time for things is difficult. And, when I have friends that aren't there for me time after time after time, I say, you always make time for what's important, right? We already talked about that. But the only other saying that I really live by and my children will tell you, hey, if you had to remember one thing that your mom taught you about work ethic, because my kids have an incredible work ethic, they would tell you, if you're going to do something, do it right. Otherwise, just don't do it. Like, I won't be mad if you don't show your horse or show your lamb or your pig or your cow at the 4-H fair, but don't do it. Don't do anything in life half-assed. So the motto in our family is we love big, we fight hard for each other, we fight hard with each other, but ultimately we do everything, in a big way. My husband would probably still describe me as a bull in a china shop. But I wouldn't want to live life any other way. For me, I like to do things well, I like to do things big, and I like to be all in. And that's what I did with CrossFit. And it wasn't just a suck physically in the gym. It was a suck, on the sacrifices that are made, because once you decide that you're going to compete at that level and that you're going to be competitive and that you could potentially win at the CrossFit games, my life consisted really, I worked all the time. And I didn't mind working 7 days a week because that way I could shorten training days down to an 8 or 9 hour day. So I would make up the work because a police chief's job is never done. I mean, you work all the time. And so I worked on weekends, I worked at night. But I worked, I trained, I ate, and I slept. I didn't have a social life at all. And you have to endure all the people looking at you when you go to a restaurant and you ask for your dressing on the side, and you're making sure you're getting enough fuel and the right fuel, and you're not eating greasy food. And you talked about it at work, oh, you built a CrossFit gym. I built a big CrossFit gym at the Hayward Police Department. And everybody was like, oh my God, is she going to expect us all to be fitness fanatics? I mean, and I kept having to reassure the union, no, it's an opportunity, it's a resource. I'm not going to make people do it. I want to encourage people to be fit to take care of themselves, the community that they serve, their loved ones, their children. um, and it's amazing how suspicious people are, that they think that you're going to start making them do something, instead of just recognizing that, no, this is a resource for you. And the smart people took advantage of it. And I have no idea where things are at with that now, but having been retired, but it was just a resource, just like, providing your officers with training opportunities. The CrossFit gym that we built was a training opportunity, to maintain fitness. And there were, 20 or 30 people that used it regularly. But, you take a department of 300 people and you've only got 20 or 30 people, you don't even have 10% of the people using it, which is, incredibly disappointing. Some of it is because of commute, or, it was close to the department, not close to where they lived. But ultimately, it just, fitness doesn't seem to be that important to people until they're at a point where something catastrophic happens. And that is unfortunate. And even though you and I are both huge believers that we're all going to age, but we do whatever we can to slow the aging process to maintain fitness. I would also argue, I mean, to your point earlier, you were talking about with your son being in the doctor's office and what you saw. I unexpectedly had my knee replaced. It was an old merge injury. I jumped off an 8-foot wall. I went left, my knee went right. I had my ACL repaired, and it's pretty common, the osteoarthritis. And for me, it just happened overnight. Like, literally, I worked out like I always do, and the next day I couldn't walk. And I ended up having an unexpected knee replacement last year. And I sat in that surgeon's office. I've been there a zillion times, right? Because you have to keep going in for follow-ups. And I am like the only human in there that's fit. I mean, I'm not overly fit. I mean, I'm not competing now, but I'm, I'm 59 years old and I feel like my clothes fit well and I eat well. And, I guess I could be skinnier, but I eat for
You're
my
riding horses
lifestyle.
competitively.
I am. I still have a nutrition coach, which people think, well, that's quite a luxury since you don't compete in CrossFit anymore. And I'm like, you know what? He keeps me on track to make sure that I'm not eating junk and that I'm not snacking crap because I'm not competing. So I'm not as rigid as I was. But yeah, just it's shocking to me to go into a doctor's office, and it doesn't matter if it's a physical for my primary care physician or if I have a cold or if I'm having my knee replaced. 90% of the people in that room can barely get in and out of their car. And it is depressing as hell because I am competing for services with them.
Yep.
And I have to wait 6 months to get into the doctor. But they have, they're on statin and 40 different medications, and there's no lifestyle change. And I think, you know, how do we make this change? Well, maybe instead of teaching kids about, I could be very political here. Instead of them teaching people in third grade about what gender they are, if we spent some time teaching people about nutrition and how to fuel themselves and how to drive by a McDonald's and know that there's nothing there that's going to help them have a better day, and that it doesn't cost more to go buy a fresh vegetable, and how to prepare it, how to steam it, how to microwave it, how to cook it. I think as a society in America, we have completely missed the boat on what's important.
Well,
That's my rant. That's my rant for the day.
I like it. Yeah, let's go off the rails a little. Yeah, we got 15 minutes to go off the rails here. Um, when you said that, I immediately looked up because I've got my Marion Nestle book, Soda Politics, Salt, Sugar, Fat. I don't know if you've ever read any of those books, but
I haven't.
yeah, Nina Teicholz, she wrote the book Why We Get Fat. But she's a New York Times author, and one of the wellness programs that we worked on, I worked on with a group out of Reno, Nevada, their Specialty Health, retired
Right.
Chief Steve Pitts and
Great
Dr.
guy.
Jim Greenwald, and Rob Wolf was on their advisory board for a long time. So they were really they were doing blood testing, and we talked about this offline, and I don't want to go into it all now, but I do, it's just kind of an example of I think where CrossFit or programs that are very similar to CrossFit, where they can be very beneficial to police officers in particular. And you mentioned something a second ago that I really want to hone in on, right? Because this podcast is sponsored by a group called Performance Protocol, which is bringing executive coaching into police departments. And when we say executive coaching, it's just coaching and 120
Right.
different categories of things that you can focus on. It's all individually based. Guys that used to run the FBI NA do the are in charge of the coach. They train the coaches. They set the curriculum for it, but nutrition is one of those things. If you need a nutrition coach, here's access to a nutrition coach. It's a simple, if your department gets engaged with the program, they can jump on, they can find a nutrition coach. Hey, I need to exercise, whatever. At the beginning of all that, as part of the program too, you get access to a precision health report, which is going to give you your 8-year cardiometabolic
Your
risk
markers.
assessment. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
blood, the blood doesn't lie. That was a presentation that I did that actually with Dr. Gil Martin for the IACP Wellness Symposium. Really, and just trying to educate people on what's happening underneath the hood. What are all these different stressors, chemical, emotional, physical, which includes things like, your exercise, your stress at work, what you're eating, the stress outside of work, any physical injuries that you may have, all of these things you may be exposed to throughout your day. How does that impact what is going on under the hood? If right, you can take steps to do something about it. But if you don't know what to do, the worst thing is to do nothing. What you need to do is find somebody that knows what to do. And this is one of the reasons why I've absolutely, if anyone, I don't work out in a CrossFit gym anymore. I've got my own garage gym. I do miss working out with people, and every once in a while I still try to get back into a gym and work out with people. But if you're looking for a place to get started, there's no better place to go than a gym like a CrossFit gym or something very similar to it, where when they come in, it's just not your global environment where sign on the dotted line, here's my year contract, and now go work out. We've all seen the YouTube videos of what happens when but
Right. You need the personalization, you need the support, you need the community, and most of all, you need, especially if you don't have an athletic background, you need the coaching on how to move well.
Coach, someone watch it. Yeah. Who didn't make that mistake their first few years doing CrossFit? Me. I was just talking about that. Like, it took me a long time to realize, I'm like, okay, I am a very immobile person. I've got to stretch. But having a coach, the reason I bring this all up, having a coach that can see that, that can recognize and point out to me, like, here's a deficiency. Here's something that you need to work on. That's from a physical fitness perspective. But, when you're working with a performance coach, that's all aspects of life, right? It's like, there's, you can't hide from yourself. So I just bring that up because I think it's important for people to really consider. There are people and there are resources that are available that you can get assistance, from experts, people that have done that, been there, done that. And then there are people like you that we can look to and say, look, there's an example of somebody that, had a lot of barriers, had a lot of obstacles, but doesn't make excuses, just puts in the work and goes and just chips away. If you just chip away, and that's really all you have to do, is take things one day at a time. And, if you're a young officer, particularly if you're a young female officer, right, there's no reason why you can't be a police chief someday. If you're
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, but no one's going to hand it to you. Right?
First thing you should do with anything, you talk about getting a coach for fitness or nutrition, you should be getting a mentor at work, somebody that will mentor you and invest in you, that has it together.
Yeah. And, I'd love to say that I figured a lot of this stuff out early in my career, right? It's like anything else. It's like my dad used to tell me, right? Youth is wasted on the young.
It's so true. It's so true. Yeah. Only to go back 30 years and do it again, right, Patrick?
Yeah. There's some things I'd like to do again, but no do-overs, right? And that's okay. No.
Yep.
So, all right, we've gone way over. I just looked, and I knew this was going to happen. I'm gonna have we're gonna have to get on and talk about more CrossFit type of stuff. And
oh yeah, well, we'll just jump on a fun call together.
Nobody else wants to hear that, right?
No.
So just a couple of things, and let's wrap it up. One of the things I like to ask people is, like, for what's your number one nonfiction suggested book? I'll let you say it. I have it written down because you already told me.
Right. Well, I mentioned it earlier. It's Emotional Survival by Kevin Gilmartin. It is a book that I didn't stumble upon until I was already a commander, but it is a book, much like you, that my husband is an instructor, and whenever he teaches police departments, that's a book he hands out. I mean, it's like the cop's Bible. Just having situational awareness of what the job is going to do to you, whether you think it is or isn't, it's going to happen. And so that's my favorite non-fictional book. Even though I've been retired for 4 years, I love that book. And as I continue to mentor people for promotions and for chief's jobs, that is a book I recommend. If they're not intimately familiar with it, they need to get that way.
What is your favorite fiction book? And I don't think people are going to be surprised after some of the things that you've said on this. if we had to take a guess.
Yeah, Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. My husband had recommended that book to me probably about 10 years ago. And it was, I carried that thing around. I mean, I traveled a lot as a chief and I carried it around, and the thing is about, it's about that thick. It weighs like 7 pounds. And I kept carrying it with me, and I would like read 10 or 20 pages, and I like just couldn't get into it. And then I don't know, somewhere around chapter 3 or 4, I literally could not put the book down. And ever since the 2019 and the world, the pandemic, I told my husband, I feel like I am living in the book Atlas Shrugged. It is, and if you haven't read the book, gosh, get it on audio. You don't want to haul that sucker around like I did, but that is a pretty phenomenal book.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's very intimidating to look at, and
It is.
yeah, don't unless you've got a couple weeks off and you can just you can spend some time chewing through it. But basically, it's it's I guess the one sentence summary is the dystopian United States, and which government becomes more and more oppressive, more more burdensome, more laws, more regulations. It's like, yeah, that's
Yes, and the ridiculousness of it. The people stroking each other into the ridiculousness of this is okay and this is acceptable. Not only is it acceptable, it's the way we should be doing business. I have never had a mentality that I should think like all the other sheep. I don't mind being a black sheep. I don't mind thinking independently, and I'm okay if you're the person that thinks like everybody else. But I want to be able to have a conversation with you and share ideas. You don't have to believe in what I'm saying, and vice versa. And if we don't start getting back to having, I mean, I sometimes I wake up and I think, is this actually happening? I mean, it is so ridiculous what's going on in this country, and it is frightening. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am very afraid for the future.
well, that's why we need strong people. I just told my brother-in-law this. It's one of my favorite CrossFit T-shirts I've ever, of all time. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, and I don't even know if it's a CrossFit T-shirt, but I saw it. There was a CrossFit gym that had it. It's got a picture of an alien head on the front. It says, "When they come, they'll eat the weak first." So,
I've seen that.
Be strong.
I've seen that. Yep.
Well,
it's true. It's true. It's a zombie apocalypse. I always joke. I'm like, I might be old, but I'm a really good house to come to if you want to fight them off. I mean, between my husband and I, we're fit, we are weaponized, and we have high ground.
It's almost like you planned it.
Oh my
almost
God.
like
Yeah,
you planned it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't go out in the weeds with it, but I think I am about as prepared as a 59-year-old can be for, what I hope is not coming with, world politics and superpowers threatening war.
Well, have you watched The End of Us at this show?
I'm not.
Oh yeah, you've got to watch it. The first season just ended. The End of Us.
I'd be shocked if my husband wasn't watching that, because he is the guy that watches all the sci-fi.
Yeah,
movies.
It's basically about a strand of cordyceps mushroom. So it's kind of like a zombie type of show, and it's kind of end of the world scenario. But I'm not going to give anything away. And for anyone that's listening, if you haven't seen it,
the end of
after you go watch it and come back, and you're going to say, okay, we're all, I don't know where Diane lives, and I'm not going to tell you where she lives. But
I'm not hard to find.
Somewhere in the Northwest, and you'll understand the end of the show.
Oh, great! Okay,
we know where the survivors wind up, right?
Well, of course, they're
the
here.
independent survivors, not the ones who fall. Well, I'm going to start to give too much away here, but all right,
don't give it away. I'll watch it. I'm going to watch it, and then we'll have to get together and do a follow-up together.
Yeah, we'll do we could do a complete debrief on how we would survive the cordyceps virus. Yeah, we've for those that all cops know who the gun guys are, who the survivalists are, who's got which skills. we have these like, whose house are we going to? Where are we rallying? How do we get there? How much food do we? Yeah, we had.
I hate to say it, but it's so true.
Oh yeah. Well, back in the day, the midnight shift, there were nights where oftentimes there was not a lot going on. It's not like that anymore. It's a lot busier than it used to be. So you can't have those fun car-to-car conversations anymore. But yeah, those are the things that I miss.
Yeah.
But yeah, zombie apocalypse. How do you survive? And there are some good leadership lessons in here too, because one of the things I used to do this thing with my command staff, right? Like, who are your top 3 officers? What are the characteristics and the traits that are in them that you identify with? So so in a zombie apocalypse, right? Which 3? You're a shift commander. Which 3 officers from your shift are you taking with you, and why?
We used to do that too.
Yeah. Now the skill sets might not necessarily be the ones that you want, out on the street.
On the street.
Yeah. But
different scenario though. I mean, different people for different things, I mean, you're not looking for a schmoozer. You're looking for the boots on the ground, can kick some ass.
Well, let's end it with that, because you've been kicking ass. You've been kicking ass for over 30 years, and I really do appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with us today. And I'm definitely looking forward to having you on again sometime.
It's absolutely been my honor, and I'll look forward to catching you up with you on the side without the podcast. But it really has been my honor to share. And yeah, I mean, I'm on. I try not to be on very much, but I'm on social media mostly. I'm posting horse stuff. Or
what's your how do people reach out to you? How can they get in touch with you? Let's just say someone's looking for a mentor, or they're looking for coaching, or how can
you know what? I'm under my name, under Diane Stuart, on both Instagram and Facebook. I probably need to just update my LinkedIn, and I can't remember if I took it down or just haven't gotten on it in 4 or 5 years. But people are welcome to reach out. I'm always happy to mentor people. And yeah, so I'm on social media under my name, under Diane Stewart. And yeah, just shoot me a message. And if you're not a troll, I'll generally respond. If they're a legitimate source, they know how to get a hold of you. You're welcome to provide my email address out to people. And
Roger that.
yeah, no, I'm always look forward to it. You need to come out and have some community. We'll have some community out in my CrossFit gym.
Yeah. Well, maybe I need to get out there before they close that drop zone down, so I can go get a workout in with you, and I can go get a skydive
Jump with
Clark. Your husband. And
oh yeah, well, you know what?
And my wife can ride horses.
Oh heck, hey, we provide all the activities here.
It sounds like it, and I don't even need to bring my own guns. It sounds like.
Nope, you don't. Nope, we've got those too. You're good. Just bring yourself and some workout clothes, and maybe something to jump in if you're going to jump out of an airplane. Right on.
It's been a long time since I've done that. So, all right. Thank you again. Have a great day, everyone. And until the next time, 1042.